Our political coverage continues with an Alaska Senate debate with Republican Joe Miller, Democrat Scott McAdams, and Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who's running as a write-in candidate. Both the Cook Political Report and CQ Politics rates this race likely Republican. This is hosted by KAKM Public Television in Anchorage. It's an hour and 25 minutes.
And now, your moderator, Libby Casey.
Good evening and welcome to Debate for the State, the last statewide debate of this intense election season. I'm Libby Casey. While we're coming to you live from KAKM Public Television here in Anchorage, tonight's program is a joint production of all Alaska Public Broadcasting stations. Joining us tonight are candidates for U.S. Senate who registered at least 5% in recent political polls. Lisa Murkowski is the Republican incumbent. She's held the seat since December 2002. Senator Murkowski lost in the August Republican primary and is a write-in candidate.
Great to be with you.
Joe Miller is the Republican Party nominee. He's an attorney from Fairbanks.
Thank you.
Democrat Scott McAdams is the former mayor of Sitka.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome, candidates. Joining me on tonight's panel is Dave Donaldson, the Capitol correspondent for the Alaska Public Radio Network. Later in our program, APRN's Lori Townsend will also join us. And throughout the night, we'll be hearing questions that we solicited from our viewers and listeners. We'll include some of those in the program. Our thanks to the studio audience for being here tonight. Please remember to remain silent during the entire broadcast. Candidates, each answer will be timed, and you will see a yellow light at the 15-second mark, telling you have 15 seconds left. And then you'll hear this bell when your time is up. I will try to enforce this as politely as I can. Now let's begin. You'll each have 30 seconds to respond to this first round of questions. Mr. McAdams, what have you learned about yourself during this campaign?
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the things I've learned during the course of this campaign is what's possible when you put your mind to something, when you work hard. We've got a great campaign team, a great staff. I never thought that I'd be able to raise $1.2 million in 6 weeks. So, you know, I think you need to be a little bit of a statesman, a little bit of a visionary, and part telemarketer to be good at this job.
Senator Murkowski, same question for you.
I have always been one that is pretty resilient, but I have learned that oftentimes doing the right thing is also often the most difficult thing to do. But when it's the right thing to do, you don't quit. And I think it's really been focused on just that resiliency that I've known that I've had for a long time, but I really see it playing out here.
Mr. Miller, same question.
Well, I've learned that when you run for public office, even though you might not be part of the public process before, that your life is an open book. It's been uncomfortable, obviously, to a certain extent for my family and I, but it has redoubled our commitment to the Alaskan people to make sure that the right answers are reached at this very, very crisis time right now in our state's history. We've got to have somebody in office that is there, that's willing to do the things that the people of Alaska need for their future and for their children's future. And our commitment remains without any type of less commitment than at the beginning of the race, and that is to make sure the right things happen for the state.
The next set of questions touch on top stories in the news this week, and you'll each have 45 seconds to answer. Senator Murkowski, a Superior Court judge says the state is violating a regulation by giving voters a list of write-in candidates at the polls. The Alaska Democratic and Republican parties are united on this, and it's obviously a blow to your campaign. Is it fair?
Well, when you say it's a blow to our campaign, we have not counted as a campaign on division of elections, providing information one way or another about my write-in candidacy. We've been doing things the good old-fashioned way, which is ensuring that people know how to move forward with a write-in campaign. We're giving people wristbands that say this is how you spell it. We've got jingles that remind people this is how you spell it. Fill it in, write it in. It has been a very concerted education campaign. So I don't think it has been a blow to us, but As you know, that case is still ongoing. The Supreme Court made that decision today that they were going to deny that injunction or pull back on the stay. So that will be determined, I guess, in the next couple days.
Dave Donaldson, our next question comes from you.
Mr. Miller, documents released yesterday at the Fairbanks North Star Borough show that you saying, quote, "I lied about accessing the computers. I then admitted accessing them, but lied about what I was doing." Why did you do that?
I made a mistake. I learned from it. And I also found out that obviously anything that you do in your private sphere, if you run for office, is going to be out there. And so one of the other things we learned from this, initially in this campaign, it did appear that certain things might be off limits. But I've got to tell you that I think that in order so that Alaskans can understand the level of commitment, in other words, we could have fought the release of those records. We decided not to appeal the decision, even though I believe that we may be the only candidate, at least in recent American history, and this is nationwide, who's had to release a personnel file, that it's important to Alaskans to understand that our commitment can't be slowed by these issues. It has to be focused on the fact that, again, the state has got to move forward, and it's got to move forward by somebody that's not going to be in any way limited by these things from the past. So, thank you.
Let me, quick follow-up, 15-second follow-up perhaps. When you left the employment, the other things that came out was when you left the employment at the borough, you deleted emails. Some of them were related to cases, the case you were working on, the TAPS case. And the borough has questioned whether they needed some of those emails now. Some of the stuff there was available for discovery, and they needed them. Why do that?
Well, I think you first have to understand that everything that's in that file is not accurate. And I think another thing that you need to understand is, and I think something that ought to be questioned is, we're now over a year after I left that position. If in fact that was the situation at the time, why wasn't it raised then? My view of it is as well, and I think just for purposes of full disclosure, the borough has a backup system. All of the emails in that system were backed up. And so again, I think that this is an effort to play, I think, a political card at a time to again get Alaskans' focus off the issues at this point in time. I mean, we've seen that concerted effort throughout this campaign of raising things that are not related to the issues.
We'll leave it there. Mr. McAdams, your opponents are running against Washington, D.C. in many ways, but you're on the Democratic team of the leaders right now in Congress and also President Obama. How tough a sell is your message in a year where there's so much voter anger?
You know, I think that voters are very responsive to our message. For us, this campaign is about Alaska. It's not about anybody's personal issues or about anybody's personal narrative or one person's sense of history. It's about Alaska. It's about Alaskan communities. It's about Alaska's people. It's about sending someone to Washington, D.C. who speaks the language of local communities, who recognizes that we are a young state, that we're an infrastructure-poor state, that we're a state that has a case to be made before a national audience that we need to be invested in with the help of Washington, D.C. You know, the environment nationally, of course, Alaska does its own thing. In fact, Alaskan politics often run counter to what's happening nationally. So we believe we're going to peak at the right time, being November 2nd, and win this race.
Now we'll go to a lightning round, and you'll each have 15 seconds to answer these questions. You'll only hear the bell when your time is up. Dave?
Should we extend the Bush-era tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, which means those making $200,000 or more? Mr. McAdams?
No, we should not. We should extend the tax cuts for the middle class, but we should allow the tax cuts for members of the population who make more than $250,000 a year.
Mr. Miller?
Absolutely. We're entering into a double-dip recession. Cutting taxes is something that will actually exacerbate the problem. We got to make sure that we stimulate the economy, and it's not by raising taxes.
Senator Murkowski?
During a recession is not the time to raise taxes. We need to extend the 01-03 tax cuts. Whether or not we'll be able to do them much beyond a year or two remains in question. We'll be taking that up in November when we return.
To clarify for me, is that contradictory to the goal of reducing the national debt? Mr. Miller?
Reducing the national debt has got to be done by reducing spending. I mean, that's the key of it. We've expanded the federal government so far beyond the scope of what it was intended to be that the point that we need to do, at least I think that the best way to affect the reduction in the deficit is to reduce spending and to also take government out of those programs that it should not be involved in.
Senator Murkowski, does the tax cuts affect the national debt?
These are not contradictory, if you will. when you are able to put more money out into the economy to allow for that job creation, for that private wealth, for that free enterprise system to actually work, then that's going to help us.
Mr. Miller, name one thing President Obama is right about.
Well, I think that
Well, actually, if I might address the last question the other two candidates addressed. You know, I think that as it relates to national debt, we've been in a cycle of borrow and spend for far too long in this country. And, you know, as a matter of priority and values, we should never balance the national budget on the backs of an infrastructure poor state, on the backs of kids, and on the backs of seniors, while we continue to provide tax cuts for the richest 1% of American multimillionaires.
Now my question for you, Mr. Miller, what's got President Obama, what is he doing right?
although I'm against feel-good foreign policy, when our men and women are deployed, clearly they need support. And so the additional troops and personnel, the material provided to Afghanistan recently is something that I agree with.
Senator Murkowski, what's the president doing right?
I applauded the president when he named General Petraeus to take over command of Afghanistan. I think that that was a wise choice. I think that that helped to allow for a transition that could have been very, very difficult for us, and I applaud him for it.
Mr. McAdams, one thing that you agree with the Republican minority leadership team in Washington, D.C. on?
Well, I think that Democrats and Republicans both agree that a $13 trillion national debt is unsustainable, so efforts to reduce debt, I agree with.
Dave, next question.
Does the Constitution's First Amendment call for separation of church and state? Senator Murkowski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
A state-sponsored church is not authorized by the First Amendment. That's what the separation of church and states means, is that the government at the national level can't do that, and of course the states are required to comply with that as well.
Thank you.
Alaskan Simon Suchland wants to know if you'd like to see creationism taught in public school science classes. Mr. McAdams.
No, I wouldn't. You know, I am a Methodist. I'm somebody who believes in God and profess in the ministry of Christ, but at the same time recognize that, and I believe that, that science and religion should be taught separately, one in the home, one in the public schools.
Mr. Miller.
I'm for good science, and good science includes origins that are based on creation. Anybody sitting here that doesn't think they're created, think again. We all are. Clearly there are different ideas about origins. Science needs to be behind it, but there's good science on both sides of it. And I do believe that children should be permitted to see both sides.
Senator Murkowski.
I don't believe that creationism should be taught in our schools. I believe that, in fact, there should be an allowance clearly for the process of evolution that is taught. I have said, and I believe very strongly, that God gave us our soul, but when we talk about evolution, that is a process that should be taught in schools.
Dave.
Should the United States be involved in non-military humanitarian missions overseas? Mr. Miller?
I think it ought to be limited. We can't go around thinking that we are in charge of basically establishing peace and prosperity throughout the globe. We're right now at a point in our nation's history where the deficit is such that we do not have the capacity to carry on the type of efforts we have in the past.
Senator Murkowski?
I believe that we should be involved in these humanitarian missions. I think our role as a world leader, recognizing what we can do to eliminate disease, what we do to eradicate human trafficking, these are issues that we should be involved in.
I do believe that the richest nation in the history of humanity does have an obligation to those who are less fortunate than us across the globe.
This question comes from listener Neil O'Donnell. Would you support eliminating the filibuster in the interest of breaking gridlock in the Senate? Senator Murkowski.
I have suggested that we need to look at how the filibuster is applied when it comes to our judicial nominees. I think that our judicial branch has been somewhat stymied by the process that is allowed in the Senate. It's a rule that's been there for years. I think it's been abused of late when it comes to our judges.
Mr. McAdams.
I think that right now Washington, D.C. is broken and the process is frozen. I think the filibuster has been, over 300 bills have passed on the House side that haven't passed on the Senate side. And I think the filibuster is a problem. I'm interested in Senator Tom Udall's idea that the Senate actually organize on every new Congress as it relates to whether or not they'll adopt the filibuster.
Mr. Miller.
Absolutely not. In fact, right now we have an administration that is marching us so far to the left, expanding the role of government, even though we're bankrupt, that's one of the tools we have available, especially when we don't have a majority in the Senate to stop certain things, to stop this continued march toward the socialistic direction, which is increasingly bankrupting the country.
Some longer questions for the candidates. You'll have 45 seconds to answer. Dave, your question.
Senator Murkowski, a bill you introduced would give the Sealaska Native Corporation their choice of lands, but we've heard from a lot of Southeast Alaskans particularly who oppose it. It has become controversial. How significant is this in your campaign?
It's not so much significant in my campaign. I've actually been working on the Sealaska bill for probably 3 years now, trying to finally deliver equity to the Sealaska shareholders. They were promised these lands under ANCSA some 40 years ago now. They are the last Native corporation that has yet to receive conveyance. The real difficulty has been in selecting the lands. The lands that they were initially allowed to receive were in very sensitive areas, environmentally, watershed areas. So what we're trying to do is give them equity, finally resolve this after 40 years, and do so in a manner that helps the region, but also helps to facilitate the promise that we made some 40 years ago.
The concern has been, the dissent has been, that it goes beyond the ANCSA boundaries.
Correct. It goes outside the box.
And the being outside the box is the part that is a problem. Has there been the involvement of selecting where these new lands are coming from?
Being outside the box has been a problem because we are now talking about areas where people have recreated, they have picked berries, they have fished. When we're talking about land in Alaska, every acre is precious, and when we're talking about land in the Tongass, it's even more so. It has created controversy. My effort has been to involve all the stakeholders, all the communities. Sealaska has held over 200 different meetings. We have gone out to every community to ensure that input is received, and we are continuing to work to incorporate all of the changes to make it as acceptable as we possibly can.
Mr. McAdams, many people in Sitka were opposed to the bill when you were mayor. Will you support or oppose it if you get to the Senate?
You know, I felt that there was a need for a broader dialogue regarding the Sealaska Land Bill. When I served as mayor, I called a town hall meeting on maybe the snowiest day in Sitka's history over the last 5 years. And we had 4 hours of testimony that we tried to keep in under 2-minute increments, where we heard from all sides of the community regarding the bill. We had a panel who came to listen to the merits. You know, based on my values, the way I might have addressed this had I been in the Senate seat over the last 6 years is I think that from the very onset I would have expanded the conversation to include Southeast Alaska's landless tribes. Taking a look at sacred and ceremonial sites, I think, might be more appropriately conveyed back directly to clans, as is the case in ceremonial objects. And so, you know, when I get to the United States Senate, I'll continue to work with Alaska Native people regarding land equity.
Mr. Miller, did you oppose it or support it?
I oppose it, in fact, made it clear in the primary, and notably those that were standing on stage with Senator Murkowski when she announced her write-in bid, included Sealaska. It was a very important bill. Our main criticism of that bill was how the lands were actually selected. We have not just the timber tracts, which I think that there is an argument for, but in addition, kind of the sweetheart deal of this, something that has never been afforded to any other regional corporation in the state. This is certainly something that's of historic proportions, is something called 5,000-acre future interest sites. These are selected parcels throughout the Southeast, dozens of sites, not just timber tracts. We're talking about small choice tracts that were selected at Sealaska's direction. And of course, Sealaska was not happy about that. That's one of the reasons why they're supporting the write-in bid. My concern with it is it disenfranchised a large portion of Southeast Alaska from the process.
Let's talk about TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program of 2008, often called the bank bailout. It's actually now widely believed by many economists that it may have saved the country's finances despite its public unpopularity. A conservative commentator, David Frum, says it may have averted a global depression. And of the $250 billion spent specifically on banks, the Treasury now expects to actually make a $16 billion profit. So, Mr. Miller, you're against it. What would you have done instead?
Well, I got to tell you that any time that you look at a business and say it's too big to fail, it's a mistake. It's not based on the free enterprise system. Anytime that you look at a bankrupt federal government or a government nearing bankruptcy and say that we can spend $800 billion to bail out various businesses that have made bad business decisions and say that that's a good thing, I think we're fooling ourselves. Effectively what we've done is we've delayed the inevitable. We've created basically perhaps a slowing of the process, but it doesn't avert it entirely. I think we have to ask ourselves as well as to whether or not it's even a proper moral approach to sit back and say that we, for our excesses of today, are going to burden the generations of tomorrow. Because that's effectively what we've done when we say that we're going to spend $800 billion that we don't have. We're putting that burden on our children. And of course, that again raises the question as to whether it's a proper expenditure when you're talking about businesses that have already failed. Senator
Murkowski, you voted for it, but you've said since then that you regret that vote. Is your regret just because it's unpopular?
Not so much that it is unpopular. What happened after TARP, when that authorization came through, you had subsequent efforts by the Democratic majority to basically go in and use as a slush fund, if you will, some of those TARP monies that were then being returned to the Treasury. Use those for other initiatives. That's not what this was all about. This was designed, you repay that and it goes to reduce the deficit. That didn't happen. It is interesting though, when we think about that vote, it was a very bipartisan vote. It was some 78 different members, very conservative members. Dr. Tom Coburn was one of the ones that joined us in that. So it was an effort that needed to be made at the time because we were going off the cliff.
Mr. McAdams, it was initially a Bush administration plan. Would you have supported it?
You know, I think it's important that one of the things that's left out of the conversation regarding TARP is the 30 years prior to TARP where Wall Street became basically deregulated, where there was no oversight regarding the way and the business and financial practices that ruled the roost on Wall Street. I tell you, I'm happy that the Congress passed Wall Street reform. I think that we're safeguarded now from seeing another TARP happen. But you know, the thing about safety, the thing about security, the thing about oversight is it always feels like too much. It always seems like it is too much until that very moment in time when it's not enough. And then you're scrambling. Secretary Paulson walks into somebody's office and says, you can either vote for this bill or you can watch the Western world collapse. It's a difficult choice.
Next question from Dave Donaldson.
The Obama administration is crafting a new education policy. What changes would you like to see in it? Mr. McAdams?
Well, regarding education, I mean, I have served as the president of the Association of Alaska School Boards. I've been a local school board member, have a degree in education. And my day job prior to I'm on leave without pay as a employee of a school district. I can tell you that from the very beginning of me serving in school governance, I've actually been opposed to the incremental trend towards national standards. I do believe in self-determination through local control, especially as it relates to curriculum and students. My great concern with No Child Left Behind and now Race to the Top is that, you know, the problem with the national standard is it requires a national curriculum and eventually a national test. Well, we don't have any such thing as a standardized kid or a standardized community, especially in a state like Alaska, where we need to teach Yupik language, where we need to be able to teach Arctic survival, and other things that are unique to our state.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
Well, I think the incremental change that Scott was talking about, it actually started in '79 with the Department of Education. A lot of people think that the Department of Education has been around for decades, or for 50 or 60 years. It hasn't been. Historically, education has always been within the sphere of those at the state and local level, as it should be. The federal component of it is obviously created controls, it's created mandates that really don't fit the state of Alaska. No Child Left Behind, I agree fully, does not fit the state of Alaska. It's not a question as to whether or not federal funds are accepted. It's a question as to who has the power and control over those funds and who's in the best position to spend and who is in the best position to decide how those funds are spent. And I'm confident that the state of Alaska, you know, whether it's one of our native villages or whether it's one of our more urban areas, the teachers and educators in those realms are better fit to make the decisions.
Senator Murkowski.
When it comes to how we reform our nation's education laws, I think it's important to understand we've seen how a one-size-fits-all approach, No Child Left Behind, doesn't work for us in a state like Alaska. I have introduced legislation several years back. We continue to work on it. It's the School Accountability Act. We want to make sure that all of our kids receive the best education. We need to make sure that we've got the quality teachers. But assigning things like a temporary snapshot in time that dings a school for failing in one area when in fact they have made progress doesn't recognize the good that comes out of our schools. We need to evaluate our schools based on the progress that they have made. I've got provisions within my legislation that would help to advance us as a rural state and not compromise the gains that we have made.
Now is the first of two opportunities you'll have this evening to ask questions of each other. Candidates, please make your questions brief and to the point. Responses can last a minute and rebuttals 30 seconds. In this first round, Senator Murkowski, your question for Mr. Miller.
Joe, this week you sent out a flyer that suggested that somehow or other I'm threatening Social Security for our state's seniors here. And yet you were originally quoted as saying that Social Security is something that is best reserved to the states. You later said that we need to take care of people that are currently on Social Security since they paid into it. Now you've backed off on that and said that we need to provide it to those that are currently on it and about those to go on it. So the question that I've got to you is, where exactly is the cutoff? Is it at 60? Is it at 50? Is it at 40? And what do you do to provide for those then that don't make the cutoff? Are they going to get some kind of a return on what they have paid in?
Senator, you're actually referring to a card that was sent out by the Alaskan Republican Party, and the Alaskan Republican Party believes that you pose a threat to Social Security because the spending while you've been in office has doubled. In fact, you've gone from $6 trillion in debt when you were appointed by your father to $13.5 trillion today. It poses an existential threat to all programs. My position has been very consistent on Social Security from the very beginning. It is one, that the fiscal house has got to be put in order. If we don't, those that are most dependent on Social Security are going to be the ones most hurt, because obviously we can't pull the rug out from under them. Even those that are getting ready to enter Social Security, we have got to protect those payments because they know no other source, they have no other opportunity to provide for money outside of Social Security. My parents are Social Security recipients. Obviously, we aren't going to cut off my parents who are helping me here with this campaign. That's their primary income. Longer term, we have to look at all solutions, including the state's involvement, including whether or not we have privatization, including those things that can limit the cost and allow us to save our own money and not allow the government to steal it.
Senator Murkowski, you have 30 seconds to respond.
I am somewhat confused with the response because you have said that you've been consistent, and yet it was earlier this year that you were quoted as saying that Social Security needs to be eliminated. Now you're saying you're going to take care of it for your parents, but in fact, what do you do with those that you're saying we're going to have a lower cutoff? How do you handle those who may be at 50? And have paid into the system for all of their working years, and now you're saying, well, you may or may not get it.
I'll give you 15 seconds if she's asking
I've
you.
never said to eliminate it. That's never come out of my mouth, Senator. That's yet another mischaracterization of what I've said.
It was
no, there's
reported
no
in the
quote.
Anchorage Daily News.
Well, that's right. It was
got
reported in the ADN, which is basically your arm piece in this entire campaign. That is not what I said. There's not a quote to that effect. I have said that we have got to go to a different system. People in my year group clearly have got to have the option of putting their money somewhere where that money is not going to be stolen from them from the government.
Senator Murkowski, 15 seconds. Anything you need to say to that?
I'm still waiting for the answer.
I just told you.
Next up.
I think we need a group hug.
You guys are sitting awfully close together. Well, you two will have a moment to bond here because, Mr. Miller, it's your turn to ask Mr. McAdams a question.
Mayor McAdams, at the KTVA debate, Senator Murkowski said you aren't qualified to be a U.S. Senator. I want you to compare the experience that you have today to the experience that the Senator had at the time she was appointed in 2002.
Thanks, Joe. I think that's a fair question. I have stood before my community over the last 8 years. I've had to account to my community, to constituents, to friends, to neighbors on matters of policy and budget. I've worked on 8 public budgets, between $15 and $25 million each one. Senator Murkowski served her neighborhood in the State House for 4 years and served well when she was appointed by her dad. I know that there was a time in Alaska when there was a young banker who served 3 years on the Wrangell School Board and served well, as I understand. Moved his family to Juneau, then to Fairbanks, ran for a statewide office and lost, and then ran again and won, and that was Frank Murkowski. So I think to say that somebody who's been a locally elected leader for 8 years is unqualified is a bit of an insult to elected leaders, locally elected leaders all over the state.
30 seconds to respond.
Well, I think that, Scott, it's up to the voters, and I think you put it very well the other night when you mentioned that vote your values. Determine what the candidates stand for, make a decision based upon what the candidate can deliver. I know that you and I have differences of opinion about where the federal government is headed. I believe we're nearing bankruptcy. I believe that that means that what we have to do as a state is we have to look in a different direction. But I think that the message that we've got to be frank and very clear to the voters as to where we stand as far as those issues go, as far as to how we're going to address that coming fiscal issue is important for voters to make a decision upon.
Mr. McAdams, your question for Senator Murkowski.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski, during our debate at KTUU, you referred to Social Security as a troubled entitlement, if I recall correctly. And in a recent interview, you talked about the need to find reductions in both Social Security and Medicare, potentially raising the eligibility age for Medicare. My question to you is why, for Social Security, my question to you is why would that be your first remedy when we've got an artificial collar at the $106,000 wage marker from which multimillionaires pay the same payroll tax working as CEOs for Wall Street banks as a North Slope worker does, making $106,000 a year? Why wouldn't that be the first fix? Why would we want to balance it on the backs of middle class seniors?
I'm not suggesting, Scott, that this is the first fix. I think what we need to do is we need to put the ideas and the options out there on the table, because I think both of us would agree you've got Social Security in an unsustainable position at this point in time. You've got more people that are receiving that payout from Social Security than are paying in. It's not sustainable. We know how that graph kind of intersects, and it doesn't work. So we've got to address it. Right now, there's 2 bipartisan commissions that are tasked with doing exactly this, trying to figure out what are the options, what is good, what is bad, what are the pros, what are the cons, and I think we should all look very critically at where they come from on this. I think it's important to make sure that the ideas that we put on the table, you know, are not shot down, but that we can have a good constructive dialogue, because this safety net for our seniors, for those that are in need, needs to be saved.
30 seconds, Mr. McAdams.
Well, you know, I've shared this in other debates, and I've shared my concern that I feel the United States Senate has become a club of millionaires doing the bidding of billionaires. You know, if we were to lift that collar, that artificial cap at the $106,000 per year mark, and had everyone pay the same payroll tax in an equitable fashion across the wage scale, all the way up to multimillionaires, the program would be solvent for 75 years. I think that we need to put money into the hands of the middle class to build our economy, not continue to give tax breaks to multimillionaires while we borrow and spend at the federal level.
Senator Murkowski, are you feeling the group hug love? You're far away from these guys on the table, but that's not intentional.
I'm over here with Dave, and it's all
intentional.
quiet over here.
We'll go back to our reporter questions now. We will give you all a chance to ask each other more questions later on in the program. But for now, you have 45 seconds to respond, and we'll start with something from Dave.
When is it time to leave Afghanistan, and what have we learned there? Senator Murkowski?
Not yet. It's not time to leave Afghanistan yet. I think we are waiting still until there is some level of secure government, and there clearly is not at this point in time. We are very cognizant of the very difficult situation that we have there, but to put an arbitrary timeline on the U.S. involvement there, I think sends exactly the wrong signal. I don't think that Congress should be micromanaging the efforts that General Petraeus has made. I think we need to listen to the guidance of those that we have put in charge. But for us to make that decision arbitrarily and say now's the time to pull out, I think is a mistake for us as a nation.
Mr. McAdams.
You know, I think we do need to give General Petraeus time to help us recrystallize our focus and our mission in Afghanistan. You know, initially, when we've been there for almost a decade, Al-Qaeda remains a threat globally to the Western world. Their partners in the Taliban stand ready to reemerge should we create a vacuum in Afghanistan. But I tell you what, here's my pledge to Alaskans. Before I ever vote to expend an appropriation on a conflict abroad, I will be dogged with the administration. I will ask the questions that ensure that we have a clear purpose, that we have a crystallized mission, that we have a clear definition of what success looks like, because we can't afford in either human blood or in national treasury to continue to be engaged in nation building and endless war.
Well, nation building certainly isn't the answer, but when we can leave depends on when we release our military leaders to do what they're trained to do. And right now they're slowed by the politics of the situation. We came into Afghanistan with the intent to eliminate terrorism, but we engaged then in nation building. And that's why we're where we're at today, where our men and women in uniform had to wait until they're shot at or killed before they can fire back. I mean, it's a ridiculous set of rules of engagement. All military veterans in this state recognize, who have seen combat or served their military, that we can't do what we did in Vietnam. And yet that seems to be what's happening to our service members. We have got to release our leadership of the military to do what they're trained to do without being slowed by the politics of the day. And we've got to rethink about why we get involved in countries. It has got to be to eliminate terrorism, to eliminate the threat, but not to build nations, not to engage in some sort of neoconservative objective to build a country on the sweat, on the blood of our men and women.
Let's get a 30-second follow-up on this thing. How do you deal with Pakistan, the other countries in the region? They are our allies, but they have citizens and sometimes governments, entire governments, that are sympathetic to al-Qaeda. How do you deal with them then?
The enemies of the United States need to be forewarned that if you are creating a threat to our nation, we will strike that threat and we will eliminate it. It doesn't mean that we're going to descend upon your country and change out your leadership. It doesn't mean, in the example of Iran, for example, developing a weapon of mass destruction with a president that's announced his intent to utilize, some force against Israel, maybe against the United States. That look, you do this, we're going to take out the threat, but not rebuild the nation. And that's the same sort of thing that we deal with Afghanistan, with Pakistan, and other nations that may threaten us.
Mr. McAdams.
There's no question that when you take a look at the roles and responsibilities of our soldiers and our sailors and our airmen and our Marines in our armed services, that we are asking these fine young men and women to not only be equipped in their primary areas, we're asking these young service people to be ambassadors. We're asking them to be diplomats. We're asking them to have tea with tribal chieftains to build goodwill for our mission. I think that it's difficult it's amazing to me that these young service people are able to carry out this mission.
Senator Murkowski, how do we deal with Pakistan and other countries in the region?
It's one of the reasons why it's important that we are in Afghanistan. Pakistan has been a place almost of safe haven for some of those who would incite the terror, the jihadists. You squeeze the balloon in Afghanistan, go over to Pakistan, go down to Yemen. The reality for us, we've got a very, very volatile situation in Pakistan as well. And knowing that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, we've got to pay attention to what is happening within the region. So stabilizing Afghanistan is important to stabilizing the region as a whole.
Do you support building a fence on the Mexican border? The Bush administration estimated the price tag at $8 billion. And if you don't support it, what should be done about illegal immigration? Let's go to Mr. McAdams.
Well, let me start by saying I think that as it relates to immigration policy, I think we need to first enforce the laws we have on the books. I mean, it is true that in our border regions, in our border communities, we do have safety and security issues. Many of our border communities are in the mix of a huge drug war in the southwestern portion of the United States. But, I don't support building a wall. I think that walls are best left to despot regimes like the Soviet Union. I think that, we need to take a look at the supply and demand problem we have in this country for cheap foreign labor. I think that we've turned our head too long and looked the other way while unethical businesses have continued to hire undocumented workers. I think that's where we need to concentrate partially on the fix.
Senator Murkowski.
Building a wall is not the only answer here. You build a wall that's 12 feet high, and the line is that they're going to find a ladder that's 13 feet high and figure out a way to get across. We need to do better when it comes to enforcement of our borders, but to spend the dollars to build that wall defies the logic, as Scott says. If there is still that incentive to come into our country, then how do we respond to that? We've got a catch and release system going on in this country, and that needs to be addressed. We need to make sure that we fund the level of border security so that we can truly patrol this. We need to make sure that, in fact, when those who come in, that we have a process to immediately turn them around. The fence is not the only answer.
Mr. Miller.
But the fence has been obviously voted on in Congress. It's authorized, but Senator Murkowski has not voted to fund it and has voted against the funding several times, as well as many other people in Congress that are not showing leadership on this issue. We have to build a fence. And we've got to build something. That's the first step. Otherwise, you not only are dealing with an illegal alien issue, you're also dealing with a national security issue. And for crying out loud, even a health issue. I mean, we've got third world diseases springing up like wildfire in some of the southern states, particularly California. And you cannot maintain national integrity without some form of border security. It absolutely has to be done on the southern border. But there are other things we got to do too. I mean, we can't vote for amnesty, as Senator Murkowski has done in the past. You cannot build an attractant so that people decide to break the law to gain benefit in this country. We've got to take care of the problem. The fence is the first step that needs to be done, and then we've got to design other reforms to make sure the attractants aren't here for people to come across.
15-second follow-up. You've gotten some heat for referencing East Germany as a country that was able to protect its border, have a wall. How far do we go? Do we shoot Mexicans trying to come over here?
Well, come on. I mean, that was a reference that's designed basically to say that, look, we are an advanced country. We are an advanced country beyond all other nations. And to sit back and say you can't build a fence that keeps people out, I mean, that's not the case. There are throughout the world today, there have been, and of course we aren't talking about doing anything like that, but we are talking about we are the most powerful nation in the world. I mean, Americans, we have the most extraordinary nation in the world. And to suggest that when we're suffering hundreds of billions of dollars of cost with illegal aliens each and every year, and that we can't take just a part of those savings and put them into a fence that then won't work, I just don't believe it.
Mr. McAdams?
Well, it's true, we are the greatest nation in the world. And the reason why we're the greatest nation in the world is because we're the freest nation in the world. We are the most humane nation in the world. We are the most just nation in the world. And when we represent those values through our leadership, we are a beacon to the world. So I don't believe in building a wall. I think we do need to enforce the laws we have on the books. But you know, there was a time in the history of this country when the president stood up before the world and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I'm going to fight to make sure that we don't make a mistake from the past once I get elected to the United States Senate.
Senator Murkowski.
We are the greatest nation. We are so smart. So what are we doing building a wall? Why don't we use our intelligence to utilize these new technologies, whether they're the UAVs, whether it is the technology that allows us to understand what is coming and going, again, making sure that we have a level of enforcement that works, making sure that when there are those who do cross over, that there is an immediate return.
Dave.
The federal government now offers an $18 billion loan guarantee for a gas pipeline to the lower 48. TransCanada says it needs that amount pumped up to $30 billion. Is that too much money, or is it still not enough? Senator Murkowski.
That is, it depends on when we get the gas line. At the rate that we're going here, it might not be enough. I think $30 billion is the right number right now, and I think our efforts to ensure that this gets through the Congress and gets enacted into law so that that loan guarantee is back there as that safety, because that's what that is. It's that loan guarantee that is helpful to the producers so that they can advance that project. They've got the backstop of the federal government behind them. This project has escalated in size and scope, not necessarily the size, but certainly the scope and the cost, so that loan guarantee is important. Equally important are our other provisions that we've included in the bill, which is access to the Federal Financing Bank, which helps to reduce the financing costs. Anything that we can do to help facilitate it is good for this gas line.
Mr. Miller?
Well, I don't think you pass a bill to know what's in it. I mean, I don't know, and that's the frank answer. I'd have to study what the demands are and make sure that it's a good investment. But I will tell you that any gas line obviously is a good investment. We've got to make sure that the right amount of money is applied to it. There are some things that can be done, though, obviously, to enhance the likelihood of the gas line going forward and to enhance the likelihood that, in fact, any level of money would put it forward. And that is one, you don't do a carbon tax that could increase the cost of our high carbon gas on the North Slope. Something else that we need to look at is the regulatory burden that is associated with the construction of a pipeline. If you looked at, for example, the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline and its construction and the component of cost there that was due to regulatory burden, it was huge. And so if we reduce the cost in these areas where we have the ability to do so at the federal government level, it will reduce the amount of money necessary to build the line and make it a much more cost-effective project.
Mr. McAdams, $30 billion,
Sure.
enough, too much, or what?
Well, there's no question that expedited permitting and federal loan guarantees are the roles of the federal government in helping facilitate a gas line. My position on the gas line, on bringing Alaska's natural gas to market has always been, I support whatever line brings our product to market and puts Alaskans to work. Now, as it relates to climate change, Mr. Miller spoke to this, I believe climate change is real. I believe that there is a human influence on climate change. I think that as a matter of national policy and a national priority, we can incentivize the use of natural gas as a conversion fuel to help us transition from a heavily reliant carbon-based energy platform to what's next. Natural gas is clean burning. We need to do whatever we can, not just to bring the gas to market, but to help create a market on the other end of wherever that gas goes.
We'll now take a short break. Thanks so much to Dave Donaldson for joining us so far this evening. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to Debate for the State. Lori Townsend of the Alaska Public Radio Network joins us and has our first question. Candidates have 45 seconds to answer.
The Tribal Law and Order Act was recently signed into law. Before it was passed, a $50 million pilot project for Alaska Native villages and tribal courts was struck from it. Senator Begich has now proposed the Alaska Safe Villages and Families Act that would empower tribal villages to exercise certain powers to address crime. Do you support this plan, or do you have a different idea or proposal to address the high rates of crime and sexual assault in Native communities? And the question will go first to Senator Murkowski.
Well, thank you, because it was my amendment in the Tribal Law and Order Act that would have allowed for this pilot project. It would essentially provide for an opportunity for greater collaboration between the tribes, the state, the federal agencies, in terms of how we can address some of the law enforcement issues in our villages. It was not an expansion of either the civil or the criminal jurisdiction. This is where Senator Begich's bill attempts to take it, is an expansion of jurisdiction. We sought not to do that, particularly by way of an amendment in the Tribal Law and Order Act. I think the Tribal Law and Order Act is a good act. I think it's important, particularly for those in the reservations, but it was a good bill and one that I supported.
Thank you. And Mr. McAdams.
I do support our 229 federally recognized tribes and their ability to self-determine through local control, including expansion of jurisdiction for courts. I think that it's, we're a big state. When you take a look at how do we empower people who live in villages, how do we address the great need in rural Alaska, I think by finding ways to empower tribal citizens at the local level, whether it be through tribal courts, health, education, community development, I think that Alaska's next United States Senator needs to redouble, maybe even triple their efforts in working with their federally recognized tribes, because they're uniquely positioned to develop rural Alaska.
Thank you. And Mr. Miller.
I have direct involvement with criminal justice systems in the bush. In fact, those affecting rural villages. I was a Tok magistrate full-time for 4.5 years and spent some time interacting with the local villages that were next to the courts there in Tok. One of the most effective programs that we had the first rural therapeutic drug court in the state. Very effective. It was very effective because we combined with those village councils that wished to participate in a way that we were actually able to address those problems, particularly those problems that brought recidivism at such a high rate. In fact, we're seeing time and time again people coming through the court system where they weren't being addressed, where they weren't being helped, where they weren't being rehabilitated. But when we brought the communities together, the end result was much more effective. And in fact, I think that's the direction we have to go. The only cautionary note that I would say is that we've got to make sure that those that decide to be involved in those type of community approaches, there's got to be 100% consent.
Brief follow-up, 15 seconds. Senator Murkowski, it was a fellow Republican who demanded that be taken out of the bill, or he wouldn't let the entire act go forward. How do you convince your colleagues in a way that you haven't been able to do thus far?
It was an issue as to the cost. He insisted that somehow or other there was a cost involved with it. We were actually able to demonstrate to him that there would be no cost. He then came back and said it was an earmark. And because it was an earmark, he was going to fight tooth and nail.
Senator Miller, a guy you admire, Mr. Miller, a guy you admire, Senator Coburn, was the one who said, no, I'm not going to let it fly.
Well, I'm glad we brought this up. And earmarks clearly are a thing that will soon be of the past. Again, whether you'll let me on the second or not, I don't know whether it was or not, but I can tell you the way that we're headed right now, in fact, when you see the leadership of the House that's going to be probably Republican on the second, earmarks are forsworn. In other words, they don't want them. And in fact, the reason why is because it's the single most corrupting influence in legislation today. It's what creates these trillion-dollar budgets.
Mr. McAdams.
No, I don't think it's an earmark. I mean, an earmark is an appropriation made by a local or special interest. I think that expansion of tribal sovereignty, especially here in Alaska with our 229 federally recognized tribes, is the right thing to do.
Thousands of Alaskans age 65 and older can't get in to see a doctor because of their Medicare plans. The doctors won't take them because of the low reimbursement rates. What's the solution? Let's start with you, Mr. McAdams.
Well, let me begin by saying I'm the candidate in this race who believes that we need a fully funded and public Medicare program. Our primary care physicians in Alaska do have to manage a caseload of seniors in tandem with other work so that they can pay their basic bills. Too many of our doctors are forced to write for the file cabinet instead of provide services. I think it's important that we point out that during our debate at UAF, Mr. Miller talked about the need to privatize Medicare. Senator Murkowski, as a matter of record, over the last few years in 2004 and 2006, you voted to cut Medicare by $6 billion both of those years. In 2010, you voted to reduce Medicare by 20% and voted in an appropriations bill to not fund the Anchorage Medicare Clinic. So I think it's important that we have a United States Senator who recognizes that Medicare is a promise we need to keep to our seniors.
Mr. Miller, what's the solution?
Well, again, I agree with Scott, and I've said this many times on the campaign trail, that Medicare, we've got to preserve it for those that are currently there, those that are getting ready to go into the program. Again, my parents are Medicare recipients. That's their health care. But we do have a crisis point right now. Effectively, we're rationing care because of what's going on here, because you don't have enough providers that are providing the services that Medicare would pay for. And so I think there have to be reforms to allow co-pays with insurance, to allow opt-out, to allow vouchers. I think we also have to look at also prosecuting fraud. I mean, when you have elderly that are taken advantage of time and time again with services they don't need, or perhaps services that they pay for that they don't get, there has to be a reaction. There can't be just a slap on the hand, but you've got to prosecute it. So, I mean, those are some ways to clean up the cost areas, but I think at the base of it, I think the whole healthcare system as a whole, we've got to work, and it takes more than 45 seconds to talk about how we get free enterprise back in the system.
Senator Murkowski.
It all comes down to reimbursement. When a provider is getting paid 33 cents on the dollar, you're not going to see providers willing to take more Medicare eligible individuals, and we've seen that time after time after time. Here in Anchorage, there's around 7, there may be as many as 8 now in the entire community, our largest state. 7 providers who are willing to take new Medicare eligible individuals because the reimbursement rate simply does not make it. It was the effort that I made in 2008 with Senator Stevens to get a 35% permanent increase to the reimbursement rate to help facilitate this issue in this state. This was one of the bills that Joe has singled out and said I should have stuck with the party line on this. This is too important to Alaska. We're in a crisis in Alaska when it comes to access to Medicare, and it's about the providers.
This next question is about health care, so we'll have more time to talk about health issues. 45 seconds to respond. Navy veteran Michael Casey from Eagle River shared with us his personal story. 2 decades ago, his daughter was born with congenital heart defects. Surgeries have been numerous and expensive, but successful, and she now has a pacemaker. He just graduated from college, and Mr. Casey wants to know what you will do to make sure she has insurance when she ages out of her parents' plan. We'll start with Mr. Miller.
Well, I think the first thing to do is to make sure that those that are closest to the problem are providing the answer to the problem. One of the positions that I've had throughout this campaign, and I think Alaskans have heard me pretty loud and clear on this, is that the states need to take a more leading role as to what they design as being beneficial to their people. It's not a federal government role to make a decision for all. The state of Alaska, for example, has made decisions in various programs for its people, most of which, though, have federal mandates that are associated with them. It's my perspective that we as a state can do things better, we can create better solutions, we can create better responses to the problems we have. And in fact, if we have greater wealth, which hopefully we can generate through the development of our resources that have not been fully developed, we can even expand programs if the people desire to have them. But what it gets down to is, what does the state wish for its people? And is the state in a position to be able to provide that? And again, I believe the state, rather than the federal government, is in that best position.
Senator Murkowski.
What this young woman needs the assurance of is that she won't be denied coverage later on because of a pre-existing condition. It's as simple as that, and that's what's been going on. That was one of the big initiatives in the reform of health care, is how we deal with exactly that. Now, we can get into all kinds of great debates about health care reform and whether or not we actually reformed health care. But one of the things that Republicans and Democrats alike agreed on was that we needed to resolve this issue of denial of insurance because of pre-existing conditions. That is one thing that is actually contained in this health care bill. I voted against it. There are a few things that actually need to be in there when we deal with health care reform down the road, but pre-existing conditions is absolutely key.
Mr. McAdams, what would you say to the Casey family?
You know, 1 in 16 American workers today is stuck in a state of job lock, where they're unable to expand their horizons, they're unable to move, improve themselves because they're afraid to leave their workplace because they have a pre-existing condition. Now, just a little bit back to the last question, Senator Murkowski, in 2010, you did vote to reduce Medicare reimbursement rates by 20%. So we need to be consistent about what we vote on. When we vote no, when we vote yes, I think that our votes need to be clearly accounted for, both throughout the course of this campaign and throughout the rest of the debate. But, you know, Senator Murkowski voted to repeal health care reform. I don't think it's a perfect bill. There was 150 Republican amendments that were attached to that bill. It could as well be called Mitch McConnell care as it's called Obamacare. I think that the pre-existing condition reform is an important part of the bill.
I'd like to ask a follow-up. Please give your answer in 30 seconds. Is Congress's time best spent working toward repealing or defunding the health care legislation that's in law now? Mr. Miller and Senator Murkowski have both suggested that that might not be possible, repealing it. What should Congress do? Should they work to repeal, defund, or should they just work to fix the problems that are there? Senator Murkowski.
There's some things that we can do tomorrow if we were in session. We can put in place medical malpractice reform. We can allow for purchasing of insurance across state lines that would actually begin to work to help to address the problem. The courts are going to go ahead on their path as it relates to the litigation out there. They'll determine whether or not that individual mandate is unconstitutional or not. I happen to think that they're going to determine that it is unconstitutional. But until that point in time, we've got an obligation to do what we can to try to reduce the cost of health care, because this health care bill didn't reduce the costs.
So fix?
We got to fix it, but we can start that without waiting for it to be repealed.
Mr. Miller.
If it's not constitutional, we got to get rid of it. Obviously, the repeal is not going to happen because we have a president that's going to veto it. So the only other option is to defund it, and I will work with all my might and power to make sure that happens. This is a takeover of 20% of the federal economy. It's yet another step to a, I think, national health plan. It certainly is a step toward limiting access to health care. It's something that we cannot tolerate. It's something that must be stopped now. We do not have a second to waste.
And Mr. McAdams.
Well, I think Joe's been consistent in his position that he'd like to see the health care reform bill repealed. I've been consistent in my position that I'd like to see some of the more problematic elements of health care reform improved. I think Senator Murkowski voted to repeal and voted against, and so I'm not sure where you're at, Senator Murkowski, whether you'd like to repeal or improve. But here's the bottom line. We live in a system where health insurance companies have a greater role in decision making than doctors and patients do. That is the bellwether for reform.
Now a brief lightning round, and you'll have 15 seconds to answer these questions. Abortion, should it be allowed in cases of rape or incest? Senator Murkowski.
Yes.
Mr. McAdams.
Women's reproductive health services should be part of the portfolio of all healthcare services.
And Mr. Miller.
I don't believe that the life of an innocent should be contingent on somebody else's criminal act. I'm unequivocally pro-life.
Lori, next question.
Do you believe tribes are sovereign, autonomous governments? Mr. McAdams.
Yes. I believe they should be recognized as such, even though they're not here in the state of Alaska by Alaskans. And this has been, there's been opposition to recognizing our 229 federally recognized tribes as sovereign that have been part of this state for 30 years. I think we need to send a senator finally to Washington, D.C. who believes in that.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Well, as a matter of law, they aren't. But the fact of the matter is, I absolutely recognize that the first Alaskans have Aboriginal ties to the land, and we need to respect the fact that there is a desire for our communities to direct their affairs. I'm very much a local control individual. Leave it at that. Sorry.
These are federally recognized tribes. We conduct government-to-government relationships with them. They need to be respected. I suggested at AFN that we needed to have a more formal consultation process between the delegation and our federally recognized tribes. I think it's important.
Should federal money help fund public radio and TV in the United States? Mr. Miller.
Oh, wow. I knew you were going to call on me first. You know, my perspective of at least where we're at right now, and this is the position I've made consistently throughout this campaign, my concern right now is where we're headed federally with bankruptcy and a need to transition into state control. I think that ultimately those programs have to transition in that direction given the bankrupt position of our federal government. But don't expect that to happen as soon as you elect me on the 2nd.
Senator Murkowski.
I have long been a supporter of public broadcasting. I recognize that it's more than just some nice programs that you listen to. If you live out in the rural communities, if you're out there in Unalaska, this is your news source, this is your community source. It's important to us here in Alaska.
Mr. McAdams?
Yes, I believe that there is a role, albeit not constitutionally mandated. Anyways, there was a time, that was a joke, Joe. There was a time in my life when KFSK in Petersburg was the only media we had in our home. You know, I think it's part of the fabric of Alaska, and I'll fight for it in Washington, D.C.
Has the Patriot Act helped or hurt America? Senator Murkowski.
Well, I had some real issues with the Patriot Act when we were first dealing with that reauthorization. I was very concerned that there was encroachment on our civil liberties. I joined with a small group of Republicans to make sure that while we allowed for the protection and the defense, that we did not encroach on personal liberties.
Mr. McAdams.
I don't think it's made us any safer in this country. In fact, you know, I remember seeing a bumper sticker that said, "I want my inalienable rights back." After the passage of the bill. I think that any legislation that allows the United States government to spy on its own citizens is a breach on our civil liberties and ought to be fought.
Mr. Miller?
Well, there's no question it's helped. We haven't had a terrorist strike on our nation since it was passed. Very concerned about the process in which it was adopted and concerned about some elements that are within it. But just because it's helped doesn't mean it's right. And that's the thing that we've got to keep in mind because the Constitution is the key.
Beyond the obvious constitutional qualifications which she meets, is Sarah Palin qualified to be president? Mr. McAdams.
No, I'm the one that got the first question here.
Hey, remember your answer from earlier.
Yeah. Do I think that Governor Palin is qualified to be president of the United States? I think that in a strict sense she is. She isn't somebody whose ideology I support and I agree with.
Mr. Miller.
Of course she is. I mean, you look at who we have in office right now and compare the two, there's no comparison.
Senator Murkowski.
If she were to run right now, I would not support her as president.
Here's a question from Roger Jacobson in Valdez. If you could go back in time to 1958, would you vote for or against Alaska statehood and why? Mr. Miller.
Well, of course I vote for it. The reason why is because the state has the capacity to do great things, and even then it did. And I mean, you look at the resource base we have here, you look at the ability that we have to move forward this nation, we have extraordinary opportunities through states, and when states are in control of the resource base, which was what was intended through the Statehood Act, that's what really empowers us as a people.
Senator Murkowski.
Well, I had just been born. My grandparents were arguing about this at the time. We were living down in Ketchikan there, and the big fight was over the fisheries and who was going to control the fisheries. And I think in view of what we have seen now and how we have been able to develop not only our fisheries, but all other resources to the level that we have, of course statehood was a great thing, and I probably would have been an advocate with them.
Mr. McAdams.
Absolutely, I would have supported statehood. And you know, there's no question. I think there's plenty of reason to take a look at the fact that our Constitution was ratified on the same ballot as a provision that removed the fish traps from the Seattle Sevens fish traps from Alaska. You know, I think that it's time to bring back the spirit of '56 with our state constitution. Stop allowing outside interests to import labor and export wealth.
Now candidates get a chance to question one another. Please keep your questions brief. Responses can last a minute with rebuttals of 30 seconds. Let's start with Mr. McAdams asking something of Mr. Miller.
Thank you. Joe, as you know, Lisa voted against Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan. Lisa's voted against 11 appropriations bills from the Appropriations Committee this year, with 89 Alaskan projects included, for a total of $400 million. Lisa voted this last year against extending unemployment insurance. She voted, at least in a pilot program, to privatize Social Security. Do you think you would have voted any differently on any of those issues?
Well, I think that, you know, it's tough for me to actually have all of those votes in front of me to describe them. I mean, there are a number of things that clearly I would not have voted for. I would not have voted for Eric Holder, for example. He's the most anti-gun attorney general that we've ever had. I would not have voted against Secretary Bolton for the United Nations. There are a number of things that I would never have done, such as co-sponsoring a cap and trade bill with Arlen Specter back in 2008. Certainly would not have supported a number of other things that she's voted for, including endorsing Roe v. Wade, a resolution that basically is contrary to my pro-life stance. I wouldn't have voted for the repeal of the Mexico City policy. There are certainly some votes that are out there that I agree with the senator on. I mean, she did vote, I think, even though the most liberal senator running for re-election, there were still votes that she voted that were with her party and were conservative. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything that the Republican Party does as well. I mean, clearly, the reason that we've grown government to the point that we've grown it, Scott, is a bipartisan problem. It's both Democrats and Republicans. So I think that we've got to look at everything that government has done over the last several decades and relook at the approach that's been taken.
30 seconds, Mr. McAdams.
Well, I appreciate that, Joe. I do wonder, though, as it relates to Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, and the $400 million in projects across 11 appropriations bills, would you have voted for those?
Well, certainly I would have voted against Sotomayor, certainly would have voted against Kagan. I would have done much more to fight those appointments. In fact, I would have done everything in my power to have stopped them because they represent a branch of government in the judiciary. They're very activist in their approach. I disagree with an activist role of a judge, and I think that there could have been a lot more fight put in that to make sure that those were stopped.
We'll end it there. Mr. Miller, your question for Senator Murkowski.
Senator, you raised a flyer that the Alaskan Republican Party sent concerning Social Security and your perspective on that. You've also sent out a number of mailers recently, including one claiming that prominent Democrats, such as Ethan Berkowitz, were supporting you and not Scott McAdams. You also indicated that Patty Murray was supporting you. In response to these things, the chairwoman of the Democratic Party, Patty Higgins, stated that Lisa, this is a quote, Lisa's lied about fellow Alaskans in order to win. This is truly outrageous, end quote. And I would also note that your campaign actually apologized for that. You just, after that, sent out another flyer, and that is this one right here. And on that flyer, you note that you are, quote, the NRA-endorsed candidate and is a strong supporter of our Second Amendment. And yet, on the American Rifleman, this is the November 2010 cover, it reflects that you were not endorsed. Senator, will your campaign apologize to Alaskans for lying about the endorsement?
Joe, I think you know, as well as Scott, that the flyer that was sent out about 3 or 4 days ago, in which we take the quotes from not only Ethan Berkowitz, Patty Murray, Bob Poe, there were a couple other Democrats. These were quotes that were absolutely in context. What was a mistake and an error on the campaign, and as the candidate, I have personally called Ethan Berkowitz to apologize because the headline made it appear that Ethan did not support Scott McAdams. And I told him that that was an error on behalf of the campaign. But as the candidate, I accepted responsibility and I apologized, and he accepted that apology. That is as clear on its face, and that has been made very public. So I don't know that there is anything more that needs to be apologized. I apologized to Mr. Berkowitz, and that was where it was appropriate.
Yes, Senator, you still haven't answered the question. You state that you're the NRA-endorsed candidate, and yet the NRA says you aren't.
I was endorsed by the NRA in the primary, and you know that I received that because I think it caused you a little bit of consternation because you had worked very hard, I think, to try to get that. And we received that without hesitation, without qualification, and I was proud to receive the endorsement of the NRA.
Senator Murkowski, your question for Mr. McAdams.
Scott, on Monday, we were talking at the chamber in Fairbanks, and one of the questions that was asked of both you and Joe was, if you were to get to the United States Senate, which committees would you like to serve on? You did not answer at that point in time, and then yesterday when we were at the Rotary, the question came up again, and you responded that you'd like to serve on the Energy Committee. And I applaud you for recognizing the value to Alaska of energy. In fact, we have had an Alaskan on the Energy Committee, I believe, for at least the past 30 years. So the question to you is, why are you asking voters to replace my seniority on the Energy Committee as the ranking member, possibly the chairman of the Energy Committee, with a freshman senator hoping to be placed on the committee at the bottom of the list in terms of seniority?
Well, thank you, Senator. In regards to the answering specifically the Fairbanks issue of answering the question, you'll remember it was a two-part question, and we had about 30 seconds to answer, and so we did run out of time, in fairness, on that one. Regarding seniority, I think it is important that we have a United States Senator who builds seniority and uses it appropriately. I mean, when I look at Alaska's natural resources, I think we all share the concern that we're a resource state and we need to bring our resources to market. We need energy policy that does that. Right now, those projects are sitting empty. We're not bringing our energy to market in this state. We need a new approach, a new strategy, because we can't wait another 6 years to open ANWR. We can't wait another 6 years to get our economy revitalized, and nobody's buying what we've been trying to sell in the United States Senate over the last 8 years.
Response?
I think it's incredibly important, again, as an energy producing state, that we be helping to set not only energy policy for our state, but energy policy for the nation. That's what I've been doing for the past 8 years. That's what I will be able to do. So whether it's taking on the EPA so that we do not have an emissions policy that is brought about through regulation that's going to strangle this state, I've been leading the charge to make that happen. I'm in a position to do so. And as an incoming freshman, it does leave some questions, some doubt as to what would happen to our role in the Senate as an energy leader.
One last round. You can ask the candidate of your choice a final question. Let's start with Mr. Miller. You may ask whomever you'd like.
Senator, you've strongly criticized the Alaskan Republican Party for sending out mailers that have been basically saying that you're for cap and trade, citing the bill that you co-sponsored with Arlen Specter. But you've also made public statements that also affirm that you are a true believer in man-made global warming. And you've even praised Obama's commitment to his stance on acting on climate change. Now, of course, during this election cycle, you profess to opposing cap and trade. Are you flip-flopping, or what's the deal?
No flip-flopping at all. I worked very hard, very aggressively this summer, in fact, to ensure that we did not have a cap and trade policy imposed in any kind of an energy bill. It was my leadership both on the committee and actually sitting down with the president and cabinet members and other senators to ensure that they knew full well that not only would this cap and trade proposal that was before us kick our economy in the gut, it would take the rug out from underneath Alaska and our economy, and made clear to Senator Lieberman and Senator Kerry that it was not going to happen, it couldn't happen, they didn't have the votes. And after that meeting in mid-July, we find out that in fact we're not dealing with a cap and trade proposal anymore. Now, Senator Stevens and I did work together to deal with how we reduce our emissions in a bill back in 2007.
Mr. Miller, response?
Well, but your consistent position has been one, though, that has embraced cap and trade and carbon taxes. In fact, the New York Times said as recently as January of this year that Senator Murkowski has built a reputation within her 8 years in Washington as a moderate Republican willing to engage with Democrats and environmentalists and the climate debate. Even The Hill says, and this is a quote from you, "I appreciate the president's commitment to addressing that and that Congress does need to act in climate change." You've also been noted as stating, this is from your own website, that you believe that we must look at all possible options from regulating climate change from a carbon tax to cap and trade. So is your position, or is it not, advocating for cap and trade or a carbon tax?
You can have a quick
I would like to respond because I have taken the position that we need to deal with the tough issues that are before us. And some of the tough issues that are before us are a changing climate. And where we can responsibly reduce our emissions, I believe we've got an obligation to do so. I do not believe that a cap and trade proposal is the responsible way to do so, and I will work to oppose that at every opportunity where we're hurting our economy. It is not an appropriate trade-off.
Senator Murkowski, your question of one of your opponents.
Let's see. I'll ask you this one, Joe, because you've got a rally tomorrow, and one of the individuals that you state that you admire most in the Senate, Jim DeMint, is apparently participating in your rally. Senator DeMint has stated that he does not believe that someone who is openly homosexual should teach in our schools. And when he was criticized for this, he went on to say that he takes the same position on an unmarried woman who is living with her boyfriend, that she shouldn't be in the classroom, she shouldn't be teaching. Do you share the same views as Senator DeMint?
We live in an increasingly diverse nation with different values, throughout the nation. There are some people in this country that believe that we ought to have state-run health care. You've even made a statement that you believe that a government-run plan is not such a bad thing just as long as it works. Made that statement at a town hall meeting last fall. The fact of the matter is, if people want to pursue that type of thing, then they should be able to do it within their states. That's what the residents of the state of Massachusetts have done. The gay marriage debate's another example where we have very diverse opinions in this country about where that ought to go. I've got my own personal beliefs, but I believe that they ought to be exercised at the state level as to how you want to influence the public sphere with those beliefs. Frankly, law is values. There's no question about it. Anybody that challenges that just doesn't understand how law works. We regulate behavior. If Massachusetts wants gay marriage, then they have the right to go out and pass a bill to effectuate that. In the same way, the states that have different values should have the opportunity to decide what they want to do within their states. And I believe it is a state and not a federal issue to make those decisions.
I think you've said that you disagree with Senator DeMint, but I'm not entirely sure. I raise this as an issue because you've stated on numerous occasions that Senator DeMint is someone in the Senate that you do admire, and yet he has been almost dogged in his attacks on the Alaska agenda. It was he who sought to strip Senator Stevens of his committee assignments and to try to expel him from the state. It is Senator DeMint that has worked pretty stridently against so many of our Alaska agenda projects. So I'm just surprised that you continue to align yourself.
We have to move on, I'm sorry. Mr. McAdams, your question for one of the candidates.
Thank you. And I'll ask Senator Murkowski a question. Senator Murkowski, in reference to the nature of your question for Joe, I know that you are a supporter of the Defense of Marriage Act, which many people in the gay and lesbian community find offensive. But I want to ask you specifically a question about some of the positions you've taken throughout the course of this general campaign, which I believe are different from positions you took both in the primary and in your service record in the United States Senate, especially over the last 2 years. Voting with Mitch McConnell 90% of the time over the last year, I want to ask on some particular issues. How is it now that you're working to gain Democratic and independent voters, after having a record in the United States Senate that garnered you an F rating from Planned Parenthood, that garnered you an F rating from the NAACP, that garnered you an F rating from the Civil Liberties Journal? I wonder, how is it now that you can position yourself as being a moderate or maybe even a liberal and court Democratic voters when in fact you've been one of the most conservative people in the United States Senate as a matter of voting record, especially since you entered leadership 2 years ago?
Well, you're throwing around a lot of numbers there in terms of how many times I voted with Senator McConnell. I don't really keep track of that. One that I did keep track of was the pairing that I did with Senator Stevens. He and I voted together about 96% of the time. I'm still trying to figure out where those areas were where we disagreed. I'll be looking for that. But the fact of the matter is I have not voted along my party lines. I have not looked at where the Democrats are coming from. I look to where Alaskans are coming from on the issue. I'm looking to Alaskans' interests. It's not towing the party line, and that's where Joe tried to take me down in the primary, saying that I voted against my party 300 times. I wasn't voting against my party. I was voting for Alaska's interests, and that's really what it should be all about.
And I guess I would take issue with the concept of voting for Alaska's interests, being that we're such an infrastructure poor state, a young state, a state that needs federal investment, to vote against $1.6 billion in federal projects, including a research vessel for UAF, the $200 million hospital in Nome, to vote against 11 appropriations bills with 89 projects totaling $400 million. I mean, I've come back to your office and advocated for a $40 million capital budget for the city and borough of Sitka. To vote no on those types of projects, and then to come back and issue a press release or to take credit for the things you voted no on makes no sense to Alaskans.
Back to the reporters asking questions. We're running tight on time. I'm sorry. You have 45 seconds to answer these, Lori.
Mr. Miller, based on a comment on your website, you suggest it wasn't appropriate for the federal government to assist after Hurricane Katrina. Are you suggesting that if Alaska were to suffer another major earthquake, we should not get federal aid?
I'm not sure what comment that you're referring to. I'd like to see it in full context. But I will tell you this, that when we look to the federal government for all the answers, and that seems to be what much of this debate around this table is centered on, what can we get for the state of Alaska? How can we maximize the number of dollars coming into the state? We lose sight of the fact that if we don't start looking to the future, we're done. This country is headed toward bankruptcy. We saw what happened in Great Britain just a week ago. We saw what happened to Greece several months ago. If this state does not start fighting to the future and understanding that we've got to provide for ourselves, and we've got an incredible opportunity to do that with our resource base, then the future that we're planning right now may be no future at all. It's going to be a dead end.
And as a follow-up, 15-second answer, please. What about erosion happening in Shishmaref and other coastal villages? Should federal dollars help there?
Well, again, this is the point that I made early on in this campaign. My approach to federal funding of the state is not changing. It's just the emphasis and the direction of the fight has got to be toward the resource base. We continue to receive the funds that we're getting. Nonetheless, the fight, in other words, the fight that Senator Stevens took, same aggression, but we've got to go to the resource base rather than the earmarks.
Thank you. Mr. McAdams, how do you balance your economic goal of drilling in the offshore Arctic waters with the concerns over climate change and coastal communities' fears about cleaning up oil in icy waters?
Sure. Well, I think that first of all, we need to ensure that Alaska natural resource extraction uses the highest standards for development in the world. I think we can do that as a matter of political will. When you talk about, I do believe that climate change is real, and I do believe that carbon emission is part of the problem. But every energy realist recognizes, including President Obama, who talked about it at his fireside chat regarding the BP spill, that as we transition from a carbon-based energy economy to what's next, we're going to need new oil. Instead of exporting environmental degradation to the developing world where they have no governance standards for environmental law and they have no labor tradition that allows their working people to share in the wealth of extraction, we need to do it here in Alaska because we do it better than anyone else.
Senator Murkowski, you said in a recent interview with the Anchorage Press that running as a write-in gives you freedom because you're not beholden to Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell or state GOP chairman Randy Riedrich. Were you before? Have you not been voting your conscience?
I have been voting my conscience, but I think it is very clear and very absolute that when you are your party's nominee, you've got a level of support that comes with you. Joe is enjoying that support from the senatorial committee now, from the Republican Party. He's the party nominee out there. I don't have those commitments that might be there to whether it's a senatorial committee or to my Republican Party. I'm still a Republican. I registered as one when I was 18 years old, and I get mad at my party every now and again, but I'm still a Republican. When I go back to Washington, D.C., I will have the kind of the beauty of having come to this office from a true grassroots perspective, representing all Alaska's interests, not just the interests of the Republicans in this state.
And with that, we'll have to conclude things. That's the end of our 2010 Alaska Public Broadcasting debate for the state. Our thanks so much to the candidates, also the panelists, Lori Townsend and Dave Donaldson, our audience and crew this evening. Tuesday, November 2nd is Election Day. Alaskan polls open at 7 o'clock in the morning. They'll close at 8 p.m. If you haven't done so already, please remember to vote. Thank you and good night.
The Anchorage Daily News reports that about 150 people flooded Alaska's Division of Elections yesterday, just in time to register as write-in candidates for the U.S. Senate election. The movement is largely meant to protest an Alaska Supreme Court order on Wednesday that allowed for a list of certified write-in candidates to appear at polling places. The court's action is viewed as helping incumbent Senator Lisa Murkowski in her bid as a write-in candidate for re-election to a third term. The registrants said their goal was to make the list of write-in choices so long that it would be more difficult for voters to find Senator Murkowski's name. That's from the Anchorage Daily News. Next, a New Hampshire Senate debate